I'm Nima Rajan. The Defense Department says 2 military C-17 transport aircraft will begin to conduct regular flights in and out of Kabul. Spokeswoman Jessica Lamarand says the news is just the latest part of Canada's effort to evacuate hundreds of Afghans from their country following the Taliban takeover. She says the mission will focus on Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and Afghan nationals who have an enduring relationship with Canada's mission in Afghanistan. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau has blamed Taliban checkpoints rather than red tape for any delays in evacuations. The group Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan says it is very worried about the possibility of gross human rights violations following the Taliban's takeover. The not-for-profit group, which raises funds to support teachers and education, says it has received reports of Taliban members going to homes in Kabul to collect information on residents. This while extrajudicial killings have been reported in smaller provinces. Despite the Taliban's promises, many Canadians say they're skeptical that women's rights will be respected under Taliban rule. Western Canada is likely to be the main locale of today's election campaign, where 2 of the 3 national leaders will be holding events. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau is set to speak in Victoria, announcing support for seniors. Meanwhile, New Democrat head Jagmeet Singh will be in Edmonton to make his pitch on health care. Erin O'Toole's Conservative campaign will move through central Canada, starting in Nepean, Ontario, before taking part in a pair of virtual telephone town halls. Canada's chief electoral officer says results of this year's federal election might not be known on the September 20th voting day. That's because during the pandemic, a lot of Canadians might cast votes by mail. Stéphane Perreault says it could be several days before results are known. Mr. Perreault estimates that federal election will also cost over $600 million, or about $100 million more than the last vote. A judge in BC has reserved her decision on whether Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou should be extradited to the U.S. Associate Chief Justice Heather Holmes says she will likely rule on October 21st. Ms. Meng was arrested at Vancouver's airport in late 2018 at the request of American authorities. China's subsequent arrest, detention, and conviction of Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig are widely seen as retaliation for Ms. Meng's detention. A class action lawsuit filed in BC Supreme Court alleges CP and CN Rail caused or contributed to the June 30th wildfire that decimated the village of Lytton and killed 2 people. The suit contends that the fire was set off by heat or sparks emanating from a CP freight train operated by CN employees on Canadian national-owned tracks. 3 investigations are underway into the cause of the fire. People in Saskatoon nervous about getting a COVID-19 vaccine will be able to lean on dogs for emotional support. The Saskatchewan Health Authority and the University of Saskatchewan are collaborating to bring St. John ambulance therapy dogs to vaccine clinics this week. Organizers say anxiety can be a barrier to getting vaccinated. Well, meanwhile, Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister has appointed Audrey Gordon as the province's Minister of Health and Seniors Care. Minister Gordon takes over from Heather Stephenson, who has resigned from the post to run for the leadership of the province's Progressive Conservative Party. Ms. Gordon is currently the Minister of Mental Health, Wellness and Recovery and will continue to hold those responsibilities in addition to health and seniors care. Ontario teachers' unions are continuing their call for mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policies to be put in place before staff and students return to the classroom next month. The Ford government says it will require unvaccinated staff working at publicly funded schools to get tested for COVID-19 on a regular basis. John Haggie, Newfoundland and Labrador's health minister, says if the province adopts any kind of vaccine mandate for public sector employees, it must come from the Justice Department. Admitting that such mandates represent a legal and charter issue, Mr. Haggie says his department is monitoring what happens across the rest of the country. Farmers in the Maritimes are pitching in to help their prairie counterparts deal with what is described as a devastating drought. Maritime farmers have seen healthy crops this year and will be sending surplus hay to the prairies under the Hay West initiative. The aim is to help ranchers who are running out of feed or their livestock. This as crops have withered during extreme heat that has plagued much of the prairie provinces and Western Ontario this year. Twitter users sending each other money have a new way of making the transfer, and it's Canadian. The social media platform says its tip jar is now handling payments made through Wealthsimple Cash. Wealthsimple and Twitter will not charge fees on transfers made through tip jar. All right, stay with us as we take a look at the overall cost of the federal election and how inflation can impact the amount of taxpayer money going into federal campaigns. An interview with Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, coming up next. According to Elections Canada, this federal election could turn out to be the most expensive election in the country's history. The estimated price tag for this election could be as much as $610 million, which would be $100 million more than the 2019 election. This while the inflation rate reached 3.7% last month, according to Statistics Canada. This was the biggest increase to year-over-year consumer prices since May 2011. A major annual increase was homeowner replacement costs, which rose 13.8%. That is the biggest increase since October 1987. Joining us today to dive into the expenses associated with the election is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with this, sir. The inflation rate reached 3.7% last month. What is the significance of this growing number here?
Well, the first thing that we have to remember is that you can't talk about the cost of living without talking about how the government increases the cost of living. So the average Canadian family is already paying more than 36% of its budget to taxes. Now, that's more than what a family is paying for the necessities like food, housing, and clothing combined. And not only are we talking about the taxes that we all know about, but we also have to talk about the inflation tax, because when the government puts the printing press on overdrive, it means there's more dollars in our economy, which means that the dollars that we already have buys less.
Now, considering that this is the biggest increase since May 2011, what do you think led to this growing rate here?
Well, I think there can be a lot of different things, right? You have to look at what's happening in different markets, but I think one of the broad things that all Canadians need to be worried about is the inflation tax, right? When the government is printing more and more money, you have more dollars chasing fewer goods, which means that the money that we already have goes not as far in terms of buying the goods and services that we rely on.
Now, talking about the election here, how are party leaders responding to this rising inflation as they continue their campaigns across the country?
Well, we heard Trudeau, who says that he's not thinking about monetary policy, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. If you want to talk about affordability, then you have to be talking about the printing press. But now, in stark contrast, we heard Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, who says that he wants to keep inflation low.
Now, turning to tax credits now, Mr. Terrazzano, we know they're aimed at making things more affordable for consumers, but how would they impact items that are already high in demand, like housing or energy?
Well, I don't want to dismiss policies to keep more money in people's pockets, but what we should be seeing from party leaders is not just niche tax credits. We need to see real and broad-based tax relief. We need to see income tax rates going down. We need to see business tax relief, right? We need to see more money being kept in families' pockets and businesses' pockets. So we need to see our party leaders do better than just tax credits.
And what have you been observing in terms of what each party has to offer Canadian taxpayers?
Well, one of the big issues is when are we finally going to get a balanced budget? Now, the Trudeau government, so far the Liberal Party, we haven't heard much from them on balancing the budget. We do know that under the status quo, we wouldn't see a balanced budget until 2070, which is completely unacceptable. From the NDP, we've heard a bunch of new tax hikes would be coming in, income taxes, business taxes, even a wealth tax, but the NDP still has no idea how it would balance the budget. Now, the Conservative Party, they said they would aim to balance the budget within a decade, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be very much of a credible plan. From the Conservatives, we're essentially hearing, trust us, and in a decade, we'll have done something good.
And considering this rising inflation rate, how does this affect the election in terms of government spending?
Well, I think one of the huge issues that we all need to grapple with is the massive government spending and how we're going to pay for it. And we need to remember that the government was spending all-time highs, inflation adjusted and real, so population growth, even before COVID-19, spending all-time highs. Then during COVID-19, we saw a massive increase in spending, and Budget 2021 under the Trudeau government expects to increase permanent government spending by $100 billion by 2026. So we need these parties to actually come to the table with proposals to rein in the bloated budget.
All right, sir, just about 45 seconds left now, but bringing it back to our viewers, how does inflation affect everyday Canadians who may be wanting to buy a house or go on a road trip or even buy groceries?
Well, we just have to remember that government significantly increases the cost of living, right? When we talk about gasoline, well, up to 42% of the gas price comes through taxes. When we're talking about how to reduce the price of housing, well, the first thing that politicians need to do is just not raise taxes on our homes. So we have to remember that when we talk about the cost of living, it is our governments, our politicians that are significantly increasing that cost.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily.
Hey, it was my pleasure, and thanks so much for having me on.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more news from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back shortly. The federal election is in full swing, and some political leaders are already taking swipes at each other over vaccinations. Mandatory vaccinations became the first major wedge issue between political parties on the federal campaign trail. The Liberals and Conservatives have clashed over making vaccines mandatory for federal public servants. Experts are worried that if the debate is not done carefully, it could cause damage to public health efforts. With us to talk more on this matter is Dr. Dasantila Galemi-Kotra, a professor of microbiology at York University. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, given the election is being held as the Delta variant is surging, are you concerned that the election process may hurt the vaccination effort?
No, I'm not concerned that the election process per se would hurt or have a negative impact on the vaccination efforts. This is not the first election that is occurring in Canada during the pandemic, and there is no data or studies that show that the earlier elections have had any impact on the vaccination process.
Now, meanwhile, we do have concerns from people on the front lines regarding using vaccination as a political toy. So what could be at risk if parties start this kind of debate?
So far, 82% of Canadians that are eligible to get vaccinated have received a single dose, and 70% of those that are eligible are fully vaccinated. So we have done very well, thanks in part to not politicizing the vaccination. So, but nonetheless, because Delta variant is so transmissible and we are seeing a surge of Delta cases, it is important that all of those that are eligible to get vaccinated do get vaccinated. So getting lost in political rhetorics, we run the risk of losing that remain eligible Canadians to get vaccinated. They are already on the fence, and any confusion or any lack of trust as to what vaccination means indeed for all Canadians to be protected runs the risk of losing that stretch of population.
Now, the debate around vaccination right now is often framed as individual rights versus the public good. But is there a deeper context to this issue, ma'am?
I think there is actually. All of us want to get back to the normal life that we had pre-pandemic. And at the same time, we want to be safe and have those around us remain safe and be safe. So how do we go about achieving that? Vaccination is the most effective tool to really protect ourselves and protect those around us and those that cannot get vaccinated. So any discussion about vaccination has to be done very carefully, and also details how to support vaccination, how to reach those most vulnerable. It has to be done with clear and details and transparency.
All right, ma'am, just over a minute left here, but considering that this is still early in the campaigns right now, what are your thoughts on how political leaders have handled this discussion so far?
So pandemic is a health crisis. As such, we have any debate about vaccination has to be done carefully and based on the health experts' advices and recommendations, as well as based on the examples around the world and here in Canada. We have done very well. So hence, we have to really rely on what we have done so far, what has worked, and remain focused rather than create any unnecessary confusion.
All right, ma'am, 45 seconds here, but if you could advise political parties on how to frame vaccination discussions, what would you suggest?
So the pandemic has impacted everyone, right? The virus doesn't recognize politics. So, and mandating health measures is not new, has been done in the past and has been done during this pandemic. For example, mandating face covering whilst indoors, and it has served us quite well during this pandemic. So as such, mandating vaccination should be seen as providing clear guidance what is expected. Rapid testing also has been used here in Canada and around the world in order to get a snapshot as to where the virus is and accordingly react to it. But also has been used to gauge the status of an individual, not to infect others if that individual is infected. So we have the tools. And actually, when you look at it, these tools provide an opportunity for all political parties to come together in a united front to deal with the matter in hand, that this health crisis, and as such, not to unfortunately, lead to any further confusion. We have the tools in place. Let's use them to deal with this crisis and get out of this crisis as soon as possible, and hopefully get back to a normal life as soon as possible.
Dr. Galemi Kotra, we really appreciate your time today on Forum Daily. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. Federal Reserve officials last month discussed the timing for beginning to dial back support for the U.S. economy. They made no firm decision on a timetable, but appear to be moving towards starting a pullback before year's end. Minutes of the Fed's July meeting say officials concluded that it would be appropriate to acknowledge that the U.S. economy is making progress in achieving the Fed's goals on inflation and employment. The Taliban is marking Afghanistan's independence from British rule today, but they are also facing numerous challenges in restoring their own rule. That includes the threat of food shortages. Afghanistan is heavily reliant on imports, which have slowed without foreign aid pouring into the country. Also, opposition figures fleeing to Afghanistan's Panjshir Valley are now talking of launching an armed resistance under the banner of the Northern Alliance. Tensions have been growing over the slow pace of aid efforts in Haiti. This comes after a powerful weekend earthquake that killed more than 2,100 people and was followed by a drenching tropical depression. Haiti's Civil Protection Agency raised the number of deaths from the earthquake to 2,189. Officials say the magnitude 7.2 earthquake destroyed more than 7,000 homes and damaged more than 12,000, leaving about 30,000 families homeless. U.S. President Joe Biden says COVID-19 booster shots will be available for Americans starting the week of September 20th, if approved. The shots will be provided to people with 8 months after they receive their second shot. Mr. Biden also downplayed criticism from the World Health Organization. It says that Americans would be getting additional protection against COVID-19, while much of the world still waits for their first vaccination shots. A top Chinese official says all-round efforts are needed to ensure Tibetans speak Chinese and share the cultural symbols and images of the Chinese nation. Politburo member Wang Yang, who oversees policy toward China's ethnic minorities, spoke in Tibet on the 70th anniversary of the Chinese invasion of the Himalayan region. Critics say China's moves to culturally assimilate Tibet spell the demise of its traditional Buddhist culture. Officials in Pakistan say a powerful roadside bomb exploded among a procession of Shiite Muslims in the country's central region, killing at least 3 and wounding more than 50. Videos circulating on social media showed police and ambulances rushing toward the site of the explosion. Following the blast, tensions in the region have skyrocketed, with witnesses saying Shiites have turned out onto the streets to protest the attack and demand retribution. Nigerian police say gunmen have abducted 9 students on their way home from an Islamic school in the country's northwest. This happened 2 days after a mass school abduction took place in a neighboring state. Police spokesman Isa Gambo told the Associated Press that the students were kidnapped earlier this week in Katsina State. The new abduction in Katsina raises fresh concerns over the ability of Nigeria's security agencies to provide adequate security in Africa's most populous nation. Authorities suspected Islamic extremists have ambushed a convoy in northern Burkina Faso, killing at least 30 civilians, along with 17 soldiers and volunteer defense fighters. While there was no immediate claim of responsibility for Wednesday's attack in Burkina Faso's Sahel region, militants linked to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group are increasingly targeting security forces in the West African country. An analyst at the Policy Center for the New South says the militants have demonstrated an ability to attack civilians even under military escort. The United States is urging world leaders against coming to the UN General Assembly in person. A note from the U.S. mission sent to UN member nations and obtained Wednesday by AP also called for all other UN-hosted meetings and side events to be virtual, arguing that they needlessly increase risk. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said the UN has already put measures in place to deal with the Delta variant. The opening next week of the Paralympic Games in Tokyo is being used as a stage to launch a human rights movement aimed at the world's 1.2 billion people with disabilities. The campaign is called We the 15 and gets its name from estimates that persons with disabilities represent 15% of the world's population. The campaign is being spearheaded by the International Paralympic Committee, UN Human Rights, the International Disability Alliance, and others. Polish javelin thrower Maria Andrzejczyk auctioned off the silver medal that she won at the 2020 Olympics, using the proceeds to pay for an 8-month-old boy's heart surgery. The young boy has a heart defect that requires surgery. The auction was won by Polish store chain Zadka Polska, who, after winning the bid, insisted that Miss Andrzejczyk keep the medal. According to Ms. Andrzejczyk, a medal is only an object, but it can be of great value to others. This silver can save lives instead of collecting dust in a closet. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.